In a world that promises freedom through indulgence and self-serving pursuits, we often find ourselves bound, not liberated. True freedom is not found in the absence of boundaries or the indulgence of every desire. It is found in the willingness to choose sacrifice, to choose the greater good over personal gain. Jesus' sacrifice is the ultimate example of this paradox, where freedom is achieved not by escaping the world, but by engaging with it fully, even to the point of giving one's life. True freedom is often misunderstood. In a world that continually tells us that freedom means the absence of restrictions, the ability to do as we please, and to live without any external limitations, we are left with the false belief that liberation is about escaping the things that bind us. The notion that freedom is the ability to indulge in whatever we desire, to pursue our own happiness and satisfaction, may seem appealing on the surface. However, this version of freedom is ultimately hollow, transient, and incomplete. For freedom in this sense can never fully satisfy the soul, because it is based on an illusion. The truth is, freedom is not found in escaping restrictions, but in willingly accepting them, not in avoiding life's difficulties, but in facing them with courage, responsibility, and love. When we look to the example of Jesus, we begin to understand this deeper, more enduring form of freedom. Jesus' life was not about escaping suffering or rejecting the world's difficulties. Quite the opposite. He chose to enter into the very struggles that we fear, that we try to avoid. He chose the path of sacrifice, not for his own sake, but for the sake of others. In doing so, he revealed that true freedom is not the absence of burdens, but the willingness to carry them. He did not shrink from hardship, nor did he seek to sidestep the painful realities of life. Instead, he embraced them fully, showing us that the key to true freedom lies not in evading the trials of existence, but in confronting them with grace, love, and a willingness to endure. We are often tempted to believe that freedom means being free from responsibility, from the weight of duty or expectation. We want freedom from obligations, from commitments that demand our time, energy, or attention. The modern world, with its emphasis on individualism and personal autonomy, pushes this view of freedom to its limits, encouraging us to prioritize our own desires over everything else. But the reality is that living in such a way does not bring peace or fulfillment. Instead, it creates a void, an emptiness that cannot be filled by the accumulation of things, experiences, or even success. The more we chase after this shallow version of freedom, the more we find ourselves trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction, seeking new ways to escape, always moving from one indulgence to the next, but never arriving at a place of lasting contentment. True freedom, however, comes when we embrace the responsibilities of life, when we choose to take on burdens for the sake of others, when we give ourselves in service, in love, in sacrifice. Freedom is not about shedding responsibility, but about choosing to carry it with a heart that is willing to love beyond itself. It is about choosing a life that is not focused on personal gain, but on the well-being of others. This is the kind of freedom that Jesus showed us. A freedom that is grounded in love, in selflessness, in the willingness to endure hardship for the sake of a higher purpose. This deeper freedom is not an escape from the difficulties of life, but a transformation of them. It is a freedom that allows us to face suffering, to endure loss, and to endure pain with a sense of peace and purpose. Jesus, in his suffering, showed us that pain and hardship are not the enemies of freedom, but the very means by which we can experience it. When we are willing to take up the burdens of the world, not for our own sake, but for others, we find a kind of freedom that cannot be taken away. This is a freedom that transcends circumstances, that rises above fleeting emotions or temporary desires. It is a freedom that is found not in avoiding suffering, but in embracing it for a greater good. In a world where we are constantly told to live for ourselves, to do what makes us happy, and to pursue our own dreams, it is easy to forget that true freedom is not found in satisfying our own desires, but in surrendering them for something greater. Jesus exemplified this through his life and his sacrifice. He could have chosen the freedom to live a life of ease, to avoid the pain of the cross, to live as a king on earth, but he did not. He chose the freedom of sacrifice, the freedom that comes from choosing the greater good over personal comfort. He chose the freedom of loving others unconditionally, of giving himself fully for the sake of the world. This is the freedom that he calls us to embrace, a freedom that does not seek its own comfort, but seeks the good of others, a freedom that is willing to endure hardship, sacrifice, and even death for the sake of love. By choosing the path of sacrifice, By choosing the path of sacrifice, Jesus demonstrated that true freedom is a choice. It is the choice to love when it is difficult, to serve when it is inconvenient, to sacrifice when it costs us something. This is the freedom that does not come through running away from the world's problems, but through engaging with them fully, through offering ourselves for the sake of others. It is a freedom that is not about avoiding responsibility, but about taking it on willingly, understanding that in serving others, we find ourselves. And thank you for listening, and we will see you again very soon. This understanding of freedom also reveals that it is not an escape from the world, but a transformation of it. When we follow the path of love and sacrifice, when we embrace the challenges and difficulties of life with a willing heart, we are not merely enduring, we are changing the world around us. Jesus' life and sacrifice were not about withdrawing from the world's pain, but about transforming it. In the same way, when we live with the kind of freedom he demonstrated, we do not retreat from the struggles of life, but enter into them with a renewed sense of purpose. It is important to understand that this freedom is not a freedom from restriction. When we accept the constraints and responsibilities that come with life, whether it is the duty to care for others, the commitment to our communities, or the responsibility to act with integrity, we are not bound, liberated. Through sacrifice, we find the freedom to live a life of meaning, a life that is not ruled by fleeting desires, but by love and service. In the end, freedom is not about the absence of restrictions or the fulfillment of personal desires. True freedom is about the willingness to choose a life of sacrifice, a life of purpose, a life that is grounded in love. When we choose this path, we find that the burdens we once saw as limitations become the means by which we experience the deepest freedom, the freedom to live with meaning, to love without reservation, and to embrace life, not as a series of obstacles to escape from, but as a sacred journey of transformation. The act of self-sacrifice stands as the highest form of love, and through it, we discover the true essence of freedom. To give oneself for the sake of another, to put someone else's needs above your own, is an act of liberation that breaks the chains of selfishness and elevates the spirit. Self-sacrifice is not simply the act of giving up something material or momentary. It is a radical realignment of our hearts and priorities. It requires us to relinquish control, to surrender our egos and desires, and to choose the well-being of others above our own comfort. This is not to say that self-sacrifice is a rejection of self-care or self-respect, but rather It is the recognition that true fulfillment and joy are found not in the pursuit of self-centered goals, but in living a life that is directed by love, by service, and by the welfare of others. At the heart of self-sacrifice is love. Unconditional, unwavering love that seeks the highest good of others, regardless of the cost. This love is not driven by obligation, but by a deep and authentic desire to make a difference in someone else's life, to offer them a gift that is not tainted by selfish motives or expectations. Self-sacrifice is the demonstration that our lives are not simply our own to live for ourselves, but are entrusted to us as a means to serve, to lift up, and to help others. This can be seen in the lives of many who choose to live in service to others, who dedicate their time, energy, and even resources to make the world a better place. These acts of self-sacrifice may not always be grand or recognized by the world, but they are the quiet, steadfast acts that transform individuals, families, and communities. True freedom is found in the act of giving oneself over to something greater. We live in a society that often equates freedom with the ability to do whatever we please, to live without limits or consequences. Yet this form of freedom is a shallow imitation, a fleeting satisfaction that does not touch the depths of the human spirit. Freedom in its truest sense is not the absence of restriction, but the ability to choose to live for something other than oneself. It is the freedom that comes from being unburdened by the shackles of selfishness, pride, and self-interest. When we choose to live in service to others, when we choose to love without reservation, we break free from the cycle of desire and consumption that leaves us hollow and unfulfilled. We find a deeper satisfaction, a peace that comes from knowing that our lives are aligned with a greater purpose. The act of self-sacrifice also frees us from the tyranny of fear and insecurity. So much of our anxiety in life is rooted in a preoccupation with ourselves, our image, our status, our success. We are driven by a constant need to prove ourselves, to accumulate accolades and possessions that will validate our worth. But when we turn our focus outward, when we choose to live for others, we liberate ourselves from this endless cycle of comparison and competition. Self-sacrifice shifts the focus from our own needs to the needs of those around us. And in doing so, it removes the weight of self-judgment and the pressure to constantly measure up. It is in this act of giving that we find freedom from the anxieties that plague us, freedom from the constant need to seek approval, and freedom from the fear of failure. This freedom is not an escape from responsibility or suffering, but the ability to endure both with grace and purpose. Self-sacrifice does not shield us from the pain and hardship of life, but it gives us the strength to face these challenges with courage and hope. It teaches us that suffering is not meaningless or to be avoided, but is often the very means by which we grow, learn, and connect with others. Through self-sacrifice, we find that the pain we endure is not just a burden to bear, but an opportunity to love more deeply, to give more freely, and to become more fully the person we are meant to be. In embracing self-sacrifice, we also find that it leads us to a deeper connection with others. When we give of ourselves, we become part of something greater than ourselves, a community, a movement, a shared humanity. Self-sacrifice creates bonds that transcend individual concerns and draw us together in a shared sense of purpose. It teaches us that we are not isolated beings, but interconnected with all of creation. The freedom that comes with self-sacrifice is the freedom of belonging, the freedom of knowing that our lives are intertwined with those around us, that our actions have meaning and impact beyond our own existence. Self-sacrifice, then, is not just an act of giving, it is an act of liberation. It is the liberation from selfishness, from fear, from the superficial desires that ensnare us. It is the liberation that comes when we stop living for ourselves and begin to live for our others, when we step outside the confines of our own world and into the lives of those around us. In this act, we find a freedom that surpasses all understanding, a freedom that comes not from seeking our own good, but from seeking the good of others. And in this giving, in this loving, we discover a joy and a peace that no worldly success or possession could ever provide. True freedom is often misunderstood. In a world that defines freedom primarily as the absence of limitations, the lack of constraints, and the ability to act according to one's whims and desires. But it offers only a fleeting sense of liberation, for it is based on a misunderstanding of what it means to be truly free. True freedom is not the absence of restriction, but the presence of purpose, the ability to choose a path that aligns with our deepest values, and the willingness to embrace responsibility and meaning. It is found in the choices we make, the commitments we undertake, the relationships we build, not in the absence of them. In the search for freedom, many of us try to avoid the things that hold us back: fear, responsibility, duty, pain, and we believe that by shedding these burdens we will be freed. But in doing so, we often lose sight of the fact that freedom is not the absence of these things, but the ability to transcend them, to face them with courage, and to rise above them. We cannot escape the difficulties of life, nor should we try. Life, in all its complexity, comes with its set of challenges. But these challenges need not define us or imprison us. True freedom is the ability to live in spite of them, to move forward with purpose and resolve, even when the road is difficult. Jesus, in his teachings and in his life, offers us a powerful example of this kind of freedom, a freedom that is not defined by what we can escape from, but by how we choose to engage with the world around us. Jesus did not live a life free from responsibility or hardship. On the contrary, he embraced the weight of human suffering, the burden of love, and the cost of sacrifice. He did not shrink away from the difficulties of life. Instead, he entered into them fully, and in doing so, he revealed the true meaning of freedom. True freedom is not about avoiding life's challenges, but about facing them head-on, armed with love, purpose, and strength. The freedom that Jesus embodies is not the freedom to do whatever we wish, to fulfill every desire, or to follow every whim. Instead, it is the freedom to live with intention, to choose a path that aligns with something greater than ourselves, to live according to a higher calling. This kind of freedom is a freedom that allows us to live not just for ourselves, but for others, to serve and to love, even when it costs us something. It is a freedom that enables us to live with meaning, to commit ourselves to a purpose that transcends personal satisfaction, and to contribute to the well-being of others. Jesus' life teaches us that true freedom is not found in the absence of restrictions, but in the willingness to live according to a higher law, one that transcends our own desires and self-interest. This higher law is love, the love that reaches beyond ourselves to touch the lives of others. When we choose to live in service to others, when we choose to love without expectation of return, we experience a kind of freedom that is not dependent on circumstances or material success. This freedom does not come from escaping the demands of life, but from engaging with them fully and with purpose. The choice to love, to serve, to sacrifice. These are the things that bring true freedom in a world that often tells us to prioritize our own needs, our own desires, and our own ambitions. Jesus shows us that real freedom comes not from living for ourselves, but from living for something greater. The more we give of ourselves, the more we experience a deep and lasting freedom that cannot be taken away. This is the freedom to live a life of meaning, to face hardship with courage, to embrace responsibility with joy, and to serve others with a full heart. It is the freedom that comes when we stop living for ourselves and start living for others. Moreover, true freedom is not just the freedom to act as we wish, but the freedom to choose how we respond to life's challenges. It is the freedom to choose how we deal with hardship, suffering, and loss. It is the freedom to choose hope over despair, love over hate, peace over anxiety. This freedom is found in our response to the world, in our ability to choose how we will face the difficulties that come our way. When we understand that we are not victims of circumstance, but active participants in shaping our own lives, we realize that we are free to choose how we will engage with the world. This freedom allows us to transcend the limitations that we often place on ourselves, to rise above the fears of doubt that can hold us back, and to live with courage and resolve, and religiously. This freedom, however, is not a freedom that comes without cost. True freedom always involves sacrifice. It is the sacrifice of our own desires, our own comfort, and our own ease for the sake of something greater. It is the willingness to face difficulty head-on, to take responsibility head-on, to take responsibility for our actions, and to live with integrity and purpose. This sacrifice may not always be easy, but it is what allows us to live a life of true freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of self-centeredness, from the fear of failure, and from the emptiness of a life lived solely for personal gain. As we look to Jesus' example, we see that he embraced freedom in the fullest sense. He did not retreat from the pain of the world or from the responsibilities of his mission. He embraced them. He gave his life not to escape the world, but to transform it, to show us a way of living that leads to true freedom. He taught us that the way to true freedom is through sacrifice, through love, through service to others, and through the courage to face life's difficulties with strength and hope. This deeper, more profound freedom is not based on our ability to avoid challenges, but on our ability to face them with love, courage, and faith. It is a freedom that allows us to live a life that is meaningful, purposeful, and fulfilling, not because it is free from difficulty, but because it is aligned with a higher calling. This kind of freedom is the freedom to live with integrity, to make choices that reflect our deeply values, and to embrace responsibility without fear. It is the freedom to love, to serve, and to live for others, knowing that in doing so, we find the truest expression of ourselves. The path to true freedom is not an easy one. It requires a transformation of the heart, a shift in how we view the world, and a willingness to face challenges and obstacles with a mindset that is focused not on escape, but on purpose. True freedom is not the ability to live without limits or responsibilities, but the ability to choose to live with intention, to choose the higher road even when the lower road seems more appealing. It is about embracing the struggles and burdens of life, not as obstacles to be avoided, but as opportunities for growth, strength, and selflessness. When we speak of overcoming fear, guilt, and the chains that bind us to our past, We are not merely talking about external circumstances, but about the internal struggles that hold us captive. Fear, guilt, and regret are powerful forces, and they can often feel like invisible chains that restrict our ability to live freely. These emotional burdens weigh on the heart and mind, causing us to hesitate, to retreat, and to shrink back from the challenges that life throws our way. They limit our potential, holding us hostage in a prison of our own making. But when we look to the example of Jesus, we see that these chains do not have to define us. Jesus did not shy away from the fears of the world, nor did he allow guilt and shame to control his actions. Instead, he faced the fears of his time with courage. He embraced the guilt of humanity upon himself, and he overcame the regrets of the past with the power of love, forgiveness, and redemption. Through his sacrifice, Jesus broke the chains of fear, guilt, and regret that bind us, showing us that freedom is not found in running from our struggles, but in confronting them head-on with love and grace. The key to overcoming fear lies in our understanding of the power of love. Fear thrives in an environment of uncertainty, doubt, and isolation. When we are afraid, we often retreat inward, trying to protect ourselves from what might hurt us, from what might cause us pain. But love, true love, dispels fear. Love calls us out of ourselves and into the world, asking us to face the things that frighten us, and to do so with the courage that comes from knowing we are not alone. Jesus' love for humanity, even in the face of suffering, provides the ultimate example of how to overcome fear. He did not allow the fear of pain, rejection, or even death to keep him from fulfilling his mission. He faced fear with the courage of love, and in doing so he transformed the very nature of what it means to be free. Similarly, guilt and regret often hold us back from living freely. We look at our past mistakes, our wrong choices, and we feel the weight of them, as though they are chains that will never be broken. But Jesus' sacrifice shows us that guilt does not have the power to define us. His forgiveness, extended through his suffering and death, is the means by which we can break free from the hold that guilt has over our lives. It is through his grace that we are set free from the burden of our past, and it is through his love that we can move forward, unburdened by the mistakes we have made. The chains that bind us are not always visible to the eye, and often they are the ones that we cannot see, the ones that are hidden deep within our hearts. These internal struggles, whether it is fear, guilt, shame, or regret, can often feel like insurmountable obstacles that keep us from stepping into the fullness of who we are meant to be. But the truth is, these chains are not as strong as they seem. They lose their power when we choose to face them with love, courage, and faith. Just as Jesus showed us, the way to overcome the chains that bind us is not through escape or avoidance, but through confronting them with the power of love and forgiveness. When we choose to embrace his love, when we accept the forgiveness he offers, we break the chains that hold us back and are free to live a life of purpose, joy, and fulfillment. The freedom that comes from overcoming fear, guilt, and regret is not the absence of these emotions, but the ability to move beyond them, to rise above them, and to live in the freedom that love offers. It is the freedom to live with courage, to forgive ourselves and others, and to step boldly into the future, knowing that we are not defined by our past mistakes or our fears. We are defined by the love that has been given to us, and it is through that love that we are free. This is the true freedom that Jesus offers, a freedom that sets us free from the chains of fear, guilt, and regret, and a freedom that empowers us to live with purpose, hope, and love.